وعليكم
إن
السلام.
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. We welcome you for this night of Friday Night Light, and the topic is a little bit of an emotional topic. It's about grief and how to deal with grief in Islam. And considering the situation that we're living in right now and what is happening in Gaza, I know that there are a lot of people who are in pain and grieving and who have lost loved ones. And the community is in pain, as we know. And it is something that unfortunately may continue for a long time. And that causes people to have sadness and to have grief and to have that feeling of, feeling of loss and how to deal with that. And sometimes people may start asking questions of why this is happening, and trying to understand why this is happening, trying to understand their feeling themselves and how to deal with that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not leave this unexplained. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explained this in the Qur'an, in so many different places in the Qur'an. And actually in the prayer I read from Surah Al-Baqarah, where it deals with this situation of how to expect that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us that perspective of this dunya and life on earth and our place in it. And that this is a time where grief will happen, bad things will happen, loss will happen, tragedy will happen, killing will happen, war will happen, and all of this, and how the Muslim is supposed to deal with that when we have these emotions. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in Surah An-Nisa, وَلَا تَهِنُوا فِي ابْتِغَاءِ الْقَوْمِ إِن تَكُونُوا تَأْلَمُونَ فَإِنَّهُمْ يَأْلَمُونَ كَمَا تَأْلَمُونَ وَتَرْجُونَ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَرْجُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, basically that if you are in pain because of what's happening, know that others are also in pain, but the benefit that you have is that you hope in Allah what they don't hope. A Muslim has hope in Allah where others don't have that hope. So the issue of grief, and it's called al-huzn in Islam, and it is a reaction to a loss, a reaction to some type of loss in your life. And it is a feeling that is normal. But we want to know why. Ibn al-Qayyim actually said, وَلَمْ يَأْتِ الْحُزْنُ فِي الْقُرْآنِ إِلَّا مَنْهِيًّا عَنْهُ. That sadness and sorrow or grief was not mentioned in the Qur'an, the word huzn, except in a negative term. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discouraged it. So why do you think that?
So Sheikh Ibrahim's question, one more time I'll repeat just to build up to the answer myself, is Allah mentions the word huzn or sorrow in the Quran only in negative terms. It's not mentioned in positive terms ever, even though it's a part and parcel of human life and existence. There's no possibility for a human being to be born and live through this life without going through a period or multiple periods of huzn. And huzn is not just basic sadness, it's sorrow, what we call sometimes grief. And why would Allah mention this in negative terms if it is a component of our existence?
It is a normal
response of human behavior. It's a human emotion. It's something that it is, frankly speaking, unavoidable. In fact, it's something that we know was part and parcel even of the life of our Rasul ﷺ, who is known as the most positive person. A part of his a year in his seerah that we study is called Amul Huzn. Is actually getting that name by the scholars, the year of sorrow, the year of grief. And the reason for that famously is because his two biggest emotional and social supports. Abu Talib and his beloved wife Khadija radhiyallahu anha, Ummul Mu'mineen, they passed away in a very short period of time, close to each other. And this caused the Prophet ﷺ not just emotional sadness, but a lot of social pressure that did not exist, that was, in other words, handled by them, for him, ﷺ. So the Shaykh's question is very poignant. Why is it referred to in negative terms? If you think about this, three things come to mind that support this idea, why this will be a negative emotion, and therefore it's something that you and I should repel, or at least dispel. The first that comes to mind is La yukallifallahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Yes, we understand that you have been tested by a calamity. Yes, we understand that a trial or tribulation is falling upon you. Yes, we realize that you are going through a period of suffering, emotional or physical. Yes, we all go through that, but understand this. Allah Azza wa Jalla does not test a person with a burden more than they can bear. La yukallifallahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Yani, if you are being tested with this pain, this emotional turmoil, if you are going through a period of sorrow, whatever the cause might have been, understand this, you can bear it. Had this been beyond your capacity, Allah will not test you with this. Had this been something that you are incapable of suffering through, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not put it on your shoulders. You can take it. Understand this, your response is what matters. At the end of the day, how you respond to this. The second thing that comes to your mind is, Allah says in the Qur'an, أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Do people actually think that just because they say we believe, they'll be left alone and they will not be tested? We know this from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he said, the people who are the most tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are al-anbiya. After them are the ashab, and after them are scholars, and after them are righteous people from the ummah. Which means what? The people who were tested the most with all kinds of tests and tribulations. Not just social pressure, sadness and sorrow as well. Loss of family members, loss of wealth, loss of a job, loss of a child, young child or old child. People tested the most with this for sure are Anbiya. If not the same exact test, but different tests, they are also severe. After them, the people tested less than them are people who are less than them in Iman. Their own companions. People that we hold superior to us in Iman and their capacity to be tested and to come out on top of those tests. The third group of people are the righteous scholars, the true inheritors of the prophets. The scholars among those are people who are not just inheriting the religious knowledge of the prophets, but they're also inheriting their religious authority, and therefore the problems that come with those authorities. And finally, the righteous people from the Ummah of Muhammad. May Allah make us from these people. Understand this, brothers and sisters, if you are being tested with this, and we know for a fact, a large section of the Muslim Ummah is being tested severely with this. Understand this, we can take this. But understand this, sorrow is a natural human response. How we react to that is something within our capacity. If we react positively, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will elevate our ranks in dunya. And may Allah make us among these people.
Jazakallah khair. So I would like the brothers who are if they're not with us and they talk, please move your conversations to the other side because it's disturbing. Anyway, so what I got from Sheikh Salman is that one is, you see, it's disturbing me, right? Right. One is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests you with sorrow. Allah tests you with sorrow. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not test you with more than what you can bear. Right? So, and that reminds me of the ayah of the Qur'an, وَنَبْلُوكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ وَالْخَيْرِ fitna, that we test you with evil and goodness as a test. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests you with that. I would like to add to this is that when you are sad, the shaitan tries to invest in that feeling and tries to make you feel more sad and depressed and get you into a way where you're not following the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ forbade the companions from wailing. Forbade the, like wailing in Islam is haram. Crying out loud and screaming for the loss of a person is haram because it takes you out of the teachings of Islam. It takes you out of the acceptance of Allah's qadr. So the shaitan will exploit that feeling. Even though the feeling is, Allah created that feeling in you, but the shaitan will exploit it to the benefit to his benefit, where he turns you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the ayah that إِنَّمَا النَّجْوَى مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ لِيَحْزُنَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. One of the ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing what the shaitan does is he will make you sometimes have private conversations so you can make a third person sad. لِيَحْزُنَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. So he can cause the believer to be sad. Why? Because he wants the believer to never be happy with what Allah is giving them. And we are supposed to rejoice and be positive about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. Even though sadness is a natural feeling, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the shaitan will exploit it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped us not to do or not to get into this trap of the shaitan. And let's just explore some of the ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us how to deal with sadness.
Absolutely.
What do you...
Sure. Wouldn't even better thing would be to let's discuss from the beginning how to respond to this, any kind of calamity. So we know for a fact that this mention actually cited today, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ. That the first response for a Muslim, whenever something evil, unpleasant, something wrong, something unfathomable, something, for lack of a better term, calamitous, it befalls them, what should be the first response? The first response is actually as-sabr, okay, which if you think about this is actually the criterion between a person's iman as a person's strength in iman versus a person who's weak in iman. Because a person who's weak in iman, the first response for them would be panic. And they will immediately fall into what we just discussed today, al-huzn, or sorrow or grief, immediately. This is in complete contradiction to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us from. And in fact, the response that we should be doing is sahib. Sit down for a moment, think what has just happened. Yes, it will take some time for you to process the grief. This happens, something that you and I have all heard and experienced. You hear about the death of a loved one. Comes through phone call or a message. Someone comes to your house and informs you. Someone very close to you has just passed away. Suddenly. And the first response that we've been taught, as you mentioned, Shaykh, is Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. The first response that Allah mentions in the Qur'an is you be patient and then you say, indeed to Allah we belong and indeed to His is our return. So for us there is no other recourse and no better recourse than patience. And that's the reason why patience is so strongly encouraged in Islam. And so many times is mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. As-sabru diya. As-sabr is the light, or rather the one thing that dispels darkness. Similarly, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. Seek help in as-sabr and as-salah. We're going to talk about as-salah later inshallah. إِنَّ اللَّهَ مَعَ الصَّابِرِينَ. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with those who are patient. And later the Shaykh recited, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. And give glad tidings to the people who are patient. Look at this title of being as-sabirin. They're in the same category as an-nabiyyin, was-siddiqeen, was-shuhada. Three very prominent, highly prominent and significant members of the Muslim Ummah. As-sabirin are with them, are in the same category as them.
Yeah.
So the first thing we should do with any response for any calamity is we should be patient. And patience comes or rather increases with time. But like I said, the difference between a person who is patient all the time and inshallah a person strong in iman versus people who are not like this is someone who's able to respond immediately. Like the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الصَّبْرُ عِنْدَ الصَّدْمَةِ الْأُولَى. That patience is most befitting at the beginning of a calamity or the beginning of a trial or tribulation.
Yes, when it first strikes.
When it first strikes.
Yes, exactly. And if you look at I would like to comment on both points that the Shaykh said. If you look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. Allah mentioned this before He spoke about Allah decreeing that there will be tests for you, that He is going to try you. He's going to test you with these things. of difficulty, of loss. But he's telling us the way before even the test happens. That means in order for you to be able to handle any difficult news, any sad news, is that you need to really prepare yourself for that. Meaning that you need to pray, you need to train yourself on patience. You need to, start being patient. Train. This takes time, like you said. It's a gradual thing, and you're not going to be patient all of a sudden, right? So you need to train you little by little, train yourself, and continue to pray. That the prayer is really important. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was known that the hadith says, كان إذا حزمه شيء فزع إلى الصلاة. Listen to the wording. كان إذا حزمه شيء, meaning if really a hard situation, imagine he's the Prophet. Allah can give him the solution right there and then. But كان إذا حزمه شيء, meaning if something hard happened to him, or on some type of anxiety, anxiety happened to him, he will rush to the prayer. This would be your comfort. So the best way for you to, whenever you have any sad news, or you're stricken with some tragedy, you rush to the prayer. And the second thing, now all of us who have children, when the child is having trouble, what does the child do? He runs to who?
To the mother, usually.
He runs to dad. He runs to mom, right? The child runs to mom and runs to dad, right? Why? Because he knows he belongs to them. He belongs to them. They will give him comfort. They will embrace him. We don't see Allah. But when you say, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un, you are actually acknowledging deeply inside you that you are owned by Allah. And He is the one to rush to when you have a calamity, when you have sad news. You rush to Him. That's why you say, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Indeed we belong to Allah, and indeed to Him we shall return. Because comfort is only with Him. Comfort from any calamity is only with Him. So these ayat are really, really very deep. We could spend the whole night discussing the wisdom in these ayat. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah.
What I wanted to mention is, we believe in Al-Qadr, right?
Right.
And Al-Qadr is one of the pillars of Iman.
It is.
It's a very essential part of our faith.
It is.
How can that help us deal with our sadness?
Sheikh, now that you mentioned the multiple ahadith that talk about Al-Qadr being a part of Iman, talk about one thing all the time. Al-Qadr has Al-Khair and Ash-Shar. That we have to believe in khayrihi wa sharrihi, in its good and its bad. Yani what? Allah does not want harm, or is not vindictive, is the best word to describe it. Unlike the gods of, for example, Vikings, who always had a positive and negative component in their lordship, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only is a deity of rahmah as well as maghfirah. But at the same time, it does not mean He does not test people. And one of the ways in which a person is tested is that Qadr has two components. Every individual, their predestination has two components. It has a good component and a bad component. When we talk about the bad component, we do not say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused me to fall into harm. Rather we say the actions that we have committed are those that led us into this trap, into this calamity. Or it is a general harm that came to multiple people in a community. And we happen to be a member of that community. And so we will go through this kind of calamity with them together. But if we think about this, Shaykh, this is something that's very interesting. People that are together and they experience the same hardship, the same source of sadness, they tend to resonate, or they tend to rebound quicker and better, as opposed to people who are individuals suffering alone. And this is something interesting, because people who suffer alone, they usually are not quick to seek help, and they tend to become introverted. They become reclusive. They tend to segregate themselves from the community. They want to go through the pain alone. And in fact, this is something that we should understand. Whenever you are being tested with something calamitous or something that you think is too difficult for you, the best and the easiest solution is for us to approach others for help.
You're right.
And to seek them, seek their guidance. But we come back to the discussion at the beginning. The first and foremost, like Shaykh Ibrahim insisted, the first solace that we have is we rush back to Allah Azza wa Jal, our Creator. And He is the one who provides the best and the immediate solace that we need in our hearts. And then we approach the Muslim Ummah, and they will inshallah give us words of kindness and solidarity. And at the same time, it is their words of wisdom that will always help us to come out of this issue that we are facing.
Well, that's a very good point that Sheikh Salman has made, is suffering alone is not a really advisable thing at all, except for the prophets. The prophets were the only ones who were able to do that, and those who are really close to them. And I'll give you an example, but why suffering alone is not good? Because you are exposing yourself to the shaitan, because you're not actually alone. You know, you have to understand that. When you are in turmoil, when you're sad, when you're anxious, when you're panicking, don't be alone. Seek help. Go find a good, wise person. Find a relief group that can help you. Find a sheikh. Find a therapist that you can trust. But being alone, it will expose you to the shaitan. The sequence of thoughts that the shaitan will put in your mind is overwhelming, that you really can't handle it, and it will depress you. It will make you want to go and start using drugs. A lot of people will go
Absolutely.
using drugs, drinking alcohol, even sometimes use self-harm because of the sadness.
It is.
And this is very true. So I really advise anyone who's feeling any type of depression or sadness, not clinical depression. I mean, of course, clinical depression, that's a different
Something
thing.
has been
but
diagnosed, right?
sadness because of what's happening is to seek help.
It's like it's like a greenhouse effect, runaway greenhouse effect.
Exactly.
It just keeps getting worse and worse. It does not get better,
Right.
unless help is sought in this matter.
But the example that I want to bring is when Yaqub alayhi salam said, إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله فصبر جميل والله المستعان على ما تصفون. He says, I indeed only complain about my sadness and my loss to Allah. So I have, he says, beautiful patience. He's seeking beautiful patience. What is a sabr al-jameel? And a sabr al-jameel is when you're suffering and people don't know you're suffering.
Sorry.
But listen, Yaqub alayhi salam did not isolate himself. He still went outside, he still worked, he still was with his family. But people would not know that he was suffering, but he was patient. That is different from someone who's isolating himself and going, disappearing and hiding from people. That is dangerous. So sabr jameel, that's a high level of patience.
Absolutely.
Which is including that the people are suffering alone between them and Allah, but they're not isolating themselves. They're not abandoning the people. They're still there. And that's the highest level of patience. It takes a lot of faith in their heart.
Absolutely,
Yes.
Absolutely, Shaykh. In fact, the word Jameel here is many times when you translate that, is beautiful. And linguistically that's correct. Allah Jameel wa yuhibbul jamal. Allah Azza wa Jalla is beautiful, loves beauty. But here the word sabrun jameel is not talking about beautiful as such. You can say an enduring patience, a continuing patience, a patience that does not dip in its quality, that remains, or in fact anything increases in quality, or something that because of the length of the calamity continues to maintain and help the person who undertakes this patience or this activity of patience. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those people whom Allah grants sabrun jameel.
Yes. I would like to ask you, I'm going to read to you a hadith.
Naturally.
And I would like you to comment on one thing in that hadith, right? And maybe we'll comment more on it, but this is a very important hadith, and I will say it quickly. The Prophet ﷺ said, ما أصاب أحدا قط هم ولا حزن فقال. He says, there's no one that had been afflicted with anxiety or sadness or sorrow. And he said, Allahumma inni abduk, oh Allah, I am your slave, the son of your slave, the son of your slave, meaning his mother.
Amatuk, female slave.
Nasiyati biyadik, my forehead, my forelocks are in your hand. Madin fiyya hukmuk, your judgment of me will come to pass. Adlun fiyya qada'uk, and your judgment of me is just and fair. As'aluka bi kulli ismin huwa lak, I ask you with every name that you have, that you named yourself, or taught to one of your servants, or revealed in your book, or you kept the knowledge of with you without telling anyone about it, that you make the Qur'an the spring of my heart. Now, the hadith has, it continues, but I will just ask you here, how does the Qur'an, when the Prophet ﷺ said, it's obviously talking about what? Relieving sadness, right?
No.
And anxiety. But then he says, make the Qur'an, the first thing that he says, make the Qur'an the spring of my heart. How could that be the answer to your sadness?
MashaAllah, Shaykh. Very poignant and very profound question here. We discussed this already, that we hinted towards it, that there are two ways in which we respond to huzn. One is the action of the heart, what we talked at length right now, patience and fortitude. The second is a statement of the tongue, which is, we talked about briefly, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, or a person says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who decreed this upon me. But one of the ways we do so is to make dua, and we ask Allah to help us in this situation, and we seek His assistance. And assistance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best form of seeking assistance.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. Like you should mention here, Shaykh. The dua begins what? With the person saying, Oh Allah, I am your slave. Yani, conversely, you're my Rabb. You created me, I am in your hands. And he, nasiyatak biyadik.
I'm your property.
I'm your property.
Yeah.
I'm the property of your properties. Yani, I'm even less than my own parents, and they are your slaves. So I'm a product of those two people. And all of us come back to you. Our forelock is in your hands. This is something we do not understand in modern times. But understand this, if you have lived around horses or sheep or donkeys, one of the ways to control them, or one of the ways to guide them, is to hold them from here. Every single animal like that usually has a clump of hair on top. If you hold them from there, generally speaking, they calm down, and generally speaking, it's easy for you to walk them along if you don't have reins around their throat. So this is something that is well understood at the time when these ayat or hadith were revealed. Which means what? We are exactly like this in front of Allah. In fact, this is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has confirmed, that there's no single being on this earth except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has hid holding by its forelock. Yani, we are completely and utterly under the grasp and submission and the qadr of Allah. Which means what? We will always have to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of our problems. He is the one that we seek help from, and without His help we have no recourse. We can try as much as if we want to change anything within our qadr. But if something is decreed as such, this is what will happen. So one more time, we come to the same issue. It is not what is occurring to us that is a problem, it's how we respond to it. The better response is the one that earns you greater points. Also, Shaykh, you mentioned that asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that is mentioned in this. I ask you from all the beautiful names and attributes that you have described yourself, the ones that you have revealed to your Prophet and the ones that you held back. Which means what? It is from the wisdom of a person that they make dua in this fashion. This is an etiquette of making a dua that has been mentioned. When you invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you remind Him or you stimulate His mercy by mentioning His names and attributes. Does He not know about His own names and attributes? Ma'adallah. We are the ones who are ignorant about it, but not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yet, the way it is something that we invoke, or that we entice the mercy of our Lord as well as His assistance, is by calling upon Him through His names and attributes. And when we do so, it's something that is from your wisdom, that you learn the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that you know what they stand for, because you can use some of them more effectively based on the situation and the dua that you're making. And the last thing we talk about this is why the Qur'an has been mentioned. The Qur'an is the highest form of dhikr, for sure. There are adhkar that are specific to certain times of the day and certain things that we can do. As an example, mentioned that many times you and I, we fall into this. It's not even a problem. It's something that we end up doing which is less valuable as opposed to something more valuable. Because the Prophet ﷺ said that a dua between adhan and iqama is always accepted. Rather, la yurad dua bayna adhan wal iqama. No dua is ever rejected between adhan and iqama. So when adhan is called, the better thing for you to do at that time is to make dua. But many times you'll see people sitting and reading Qur'an. Is that good? It's excellent. But there is something better than that. Aside from adhkar with a specific to times or locations, any other time the Qur'an is the best form of dhikr. And therefore the Prophet ﷺ is making this dua, "Oh Allah, make Qur'an the one that radiates my heart and makes it come to peace." Because every single time you recite the Qur'an, whether you understand it fully or partially or none at all, you will find the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala healing and comforting.
Excellent. Now, I will add to that question. Obviously, you're asking Allah in this situation of sadness to make the Qur'an the spring of your heart. What is a spring? It's like you're sad and now your heart is filled with happiness, because the spring of your heart, like, you know, this spring season is the happiest season for us, right? So you become happy. Obviously, you will have to rush to the Qur'an, right?
Right.
If you're sad, if you want Allah to make the Qur'an the spring of your heart, you have to rush to the Qur'an. Isn't that so?
Absolutely, absolutely. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَتَطْمَئِنُّ قُلُوبُهُم بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. That the things that brought mutma'inna to the qulub, or that brings tranquility or peace to the hearts, is remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Indeed, by remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, do the hearts find? They find tranquility. And so the Qur'an being, as I said before, the highest form of dhikr, is the highest and the easiest form for you to gain tranquility from. Reciting and reading the Qur'an should be our daily habit. In particular, in times of calamity, it should be increasing.
Exactly.
And that should be the case for all good deeds, like dua, like dhikr, like saying subhanallah, alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, Allahu akbar. That should increase with time. And for sure, salah, the physical action of salah, like Shaykh Ibrahim mentioned before, is something we should increase upon. Because we know this from multiple ahadith of the Prophet _, in which he said that when a slave is in sajda, there's no other time when he's closer to his Rabb except when he's prostrating. Make dua at that time. The Prophet _, also said in the last tashahud, when you're sitting, is the time where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts dua. So call upon Him as much as you can. So these are times when you can make dua. These are times when you can remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also, as I said before, coming back to Shaykh Ibrahim's point, the Qur'an is the one that induces these good actions, are the ones that takes away sadness from the heart and cause a person to turn and focus on that which is a priority, worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah make us from those people.
It is very amazing, because in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in Surah, I think Surah Hijr, وَكُمْ مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ. Do you remember the ayah?
I don't remember the ayah.
So it is that when you're really sad, prostrate to Allah. When you feel like that anxiety and that sadness, rush and prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we have so far is from the Islamic way, or the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us how to deal with sadness, is one, just summarizing what we have spoken about, is one that you have the firm belief in Allah's qadr. And part of Allah's qadr is that there will be sadness, there will be calamity. And that's part of our faith, that we believe in that. And then number two is that we resort to prayer, resort to patience, right? And that Allah will not put on us what we cannot bear, right? And then now, reading the Qur'an, rushing to the Qur'an and the dhikr of Allah and the dua, as the Prophet Muhammad mentioned here. So these are points that we can use whenever we feel sad, that we do that, right? So
Absolutely.
one other thing is that if you don't do that, what are the harms of sadness on a person? If you don't follow that, and just to show you the difference between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, and how a Muslim will thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for sadness, right, which we'll get to next inshallah. But if you don't follow that, what are the harmful effects of sadness and sorrow?
So Shaykh, it's something that you mentioned at the beginning of the lecture. Shaitan becomes your constant companion is the first harm that comes to mind. In other words, a person who's in a state of sorrow, very likely, and I've experienced in my life, so I'll mention this, if you're being tested severely, especially if it's causing your heart to be in a state of tumult, constantly worry and anxiety, you're worried about something bad that's about to happen, or something bad has already occurred, and you're trying to make sense of it, how to cope with that, you will see something immediately. Iman dips, and with the dip of Iman declines ibadah.
Yes.
A person will be not that inclined to rush to make wudu, or to open up the Qur'an like they regularly used to do, or to make dua just for the sake of making dua, calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That person will not be someone who will be rushing to go to the masjid, or be the first person that others will call to ask for help, because not answering their calls right now. This person will be someone who will become, like I said, this is a runaway greenhouse effect. This person will become more and more secluded, more and more introverted. And it's not just the family as well as the friends who will feel a disconnect from this person. This person themselves will feel a disconnection from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because this is a natural outcome of husn. This is something shaitan thrives upon.
Right, yes.
This is something that he's waiting to test, or rather to put us in that jeopardy, or in that situation in which we are more and more inclined towards sorrow.
You could actually lose your faith.
You can lose your faith. Many people we know for a fact.
A lot of people stop praying because of it. A lot of people they will start having doubts in Allah.
They will go through a period of ghafla,
right,
in which they have still iman, but they will stop praying regularly. One of the first things that they'll abandon is tahajjud. And with tahajjud abandonment comes what? Abandonment of salatul fajr.
Yes.
So my brothers and sisters, it's as I said before, it's a runaway greenhouse effect.
Yes.
Be careful about this. Arrest this as soon as you come across this.
Can you explain that term? Because
greenhouse, absolutely.
Yes.
So greenhouse effect. Greenhouse effect is in the 1950s and 60s they discovered, rather even earlier than that, that if you build structures made out of glass and you cover those or tint them certain manner, it's called greenhouse effect. Sunlight enters inside because it's high energy, but when it reflects off and tries to go outside, it cannot go outside because it has become longer. I'm unnecessarily making it more complicated. It has become longer wavelength. So the environment inside becomes hotter than what's outside. This environment is conducive for certain plants and certain vegetables and certain fruits to be grown quickly. It helps with those things to be grown quickly and safely, away from infection, away from pests, and away from all kinds of problems. So many communities will start building greenhouses. Like I said, the greenhouse effect is something that causes heat to build up very quickly inside. Runaway greenhouse effect is something that has not been stopped. In other words, the problem is becoming more and more and more with every passing moment. And that's what I'm trying to say. A runaway greenhouse effect in husn is like that. A person's disconnection and distance, verbal distance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is increasing with time.
I would like to add to that is what when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, praising the Muslims when they say inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, right, and giving glad tidings. And what did Allah say? That He said that they're the ones upon whom Allah's mercy and relief will come. You see, Allah's mercy and relief will come upon them because they say that. And they're the ones who are rightly guided and muhtadun. Meaning that they will start finding why, the answer to why. The answer to why this is happening. They're the ones who will understand better why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing this. And instead, the other people who don't do that, I would like to just read from what Ibn Ashur said. He says, وَهَذَا شَأْنُ أَهْلِ الضَّلَالِ. I mean, when they say, لو كان هذا هو الدين المرضي لله لما لحقنا عذاب أو مصيبة. They say, if Islam is the true religion, why are we being tested like this? Why are we being exposed to sadness? Why are we being killed? Right? A lot of people say that. That means Islam is not the right religion. That is what they say. He says it is similar to the statements of the people of misguidance, Ahl al-Dalal, whom Allah warned us against. الَّذِينَ حَذَّرَنَ اللَّهُ أَمْرًا بِقَوْلِهِ إِن تُصِبْهُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ يَطَّيَّرُوا بِمُوسَى وَمَنْ مَعَهُ. Whenever a bad thing happens to them, they will tell Musa, this is because of you.
Yeah.
If it weren't for you, Musa, nothing would happen to us. When you came to us, our life became horrible. They said that to Musa alayhi salam, right? So they don't have the right answers. Or like the hypocrites when they said, وَإِن تُصِبْهُمْ سَيِّئَةٌ يَقُولُ هَذِهِ مِنْ عِنْدِكَ. The hypocrites used to come to the Prophet ﷺ, and whenever something happened, like after Uhud, they came to the Prophet and says, it's because of you. Because of you we lost our children. These are the hypocrites. They came. So people who say these things because they are away from the guidance of Islam, when calamity happens to them, they will start repeating these things. And how many times we hear it from, ignorant brothers and sisters who will say, because of this is happening to us, because they start doubting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is a dangerous thing.
It's a vicious cycle to be in. Think about this. Whenever a person says, what did I do to deserve this? Why am I in this situation?
Yes.
Whenever you say this, you're at least making two vicious statements against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not Al-Alim, and He's not the one who knows everything. Number two, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not just. Those are the two statements that you're making. Because you're saying that I know better about myself than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes. Otherwise, had I been in control of my destiny, unlike Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will not put myself in this situation.
Yes.
And number two, you're claiming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not being just towards you because you do not deserve this. Again, it's not a matter of you deserving punishment or deserving righteousness. It is part of your qadr. Sharrihi wa khayrihi.
Exactly.
It's goodness and it's bad and it's evil.
And Allah said that He was going to test us.
Right? Absolutely.
And that is part of the guidance that Allah gives those people who follow His teachings, is that they're guided to the truth. Allah says, مَا أَصَابَ مِن مُصِيبَةٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. There's no calamity that happens except that Allah knows about it and He permits it. وَمَن يُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ يَهْدِ قَلْبًا. And whoever believes in Allah, Allah will guide his heart. Guide his heart to what? One, to accept and be at comfort with that.
Yes.
Two, to understand the reason and the wisdom. That is important. A lot of us are asking for the wisdom. If you follow what Allah tells you, you will find the wisdom. And that is something that I want to conclude with this, but I want actually participation from the brothers and sisters here on their thoughts of that and how they deal with grief, being Muslims. And now you will find, eventually you will find yourself thanking Allah for the sadness, thanking Allah for the calamity, thanking Allah for the difficulties that happen. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I mentioned the hadith today, is that Allah would ask the angel of death, and He says, did you take the soul of my servant's son? Did you take the soul of the apple of his eye, the soul of the comfort of his eye?
No.
He will say yes. He says, what did he say? He will say, he said, Alhamdulillah, inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He said, praise be to Allah, we belong to Allah, and to Allah we will return. He says, build for my servant a house in Jannah and call it the house of praise.
Right.
And it will make you appreciate the difficulty in life. And there are so many wisdom that we can come up with, but it's a form of worship how to react to sadness. And if you have never been if you have never experienced sadness, you would never realize that act of worship. And one of it is Allah Ar-Rahim, right? Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Allah gives you mercy. Allah bestows His mercy upon you. Al-Wadud, Allah bestows His love upon you. Al-Ra'uf, Allah bestows His compassion upon you. If you never realize these in your life, you need tests to make you realize this in life. I would like, before we conclude, I know that we took too much time. Does anyone would like, if anyone would like to share something, I know that a lot of us are going through grief and sadness. If you would like to just share something that will encourage us or add value to what we're saying here.